Hello, everyone. I am Nelson Joseph Castile, founder of Cave of Mystery. Today, we're going to talk about sonship, but from the angle of the Bible for once. So, I've talked about this before. I have read the Bible several times. It's a decent book. I like the Bible. Um, I believe that a lot of the issues that people have with the Bible don't actually come from the Bible, but from preachers and Christians using the Bible for stuff that's just not in there. Overall, the Bible is decent on its own. And upon reading it as many times as I have, um, I have my favorite books. I talk pretty often about how much I like the book of Job because of how it illustrates the structure of the kingdom and our access to heavenly places, even our importance um, as it pertains to our divine identity, our true identity. Job is one of the best books when it talks about traveling between heaven and earth, going to and fro, accessing the courts of heaven, having face-to-face encounters with the like Job is an amazing book if people read it for what it was instead of what's usually preached about. It's just that he was faithful, he was tried, he lost everything, eventually got it back. I'm like, yeah, that happened. That is a part of Job, but there's so much other cool stuff there. Likewise, that's my experience with the book of Esther. Now, Esther is already an interesting book, even from a Christian's perspective, because it's one of the only books out of the 66 books of the regular Bible that most people have that doesn't mention God at all. And that's pretty strange, especially when they try to push the narrative that the Bible is the word of God and everything in it is about God. Esther is a very mysterious book in that it doesn't even mention God. It doesn't really mention a God at all. But what I've understood, what I've found is that Esther is one of the most kingdom books we have, in that it perfectly expresses the structure of the kingdom and our transition going from our carnal life, our ordinary life, into kingdom living and the processes thereof. The book of Esther is all about sonship. And that's really what I want to talk to y'all about today. So, for those of you who are here live, please leave comments and questions in the comment section that have to do with what I'm talking about. uh, if appropriate, I'll answer them while we're on here. If you're watching this later, leave some comments down below and they might become future sessions. So, to kind of deal with what I'm talking about, look no further than Esther chapter 1. Now, I came across this because of my good friend, Rabbi Smith Cosmos, right? It's great when I'm able to have a conversation with someone that's just as radical and insane as I am. And one day we're out in Kenya, up because me and him are the only ones that don't need sleep. So we're up uh, after like 2 hours of sleep. Me and him are up in the living room just talking about spiritual stuff, kingdom reality, sonship. You know how it is. And we start talking about a bunch of different religions, a bunch of different cultures. And he's actually surprising me because this is the first time me and him have ever talked about anything outside of the Judeo-Christian spectrum. And he's matching me bar for bar. And I'm loving it. All of a sudden, he's like, let me show you something. And he starts reading out of the Bible. And I'm like, what book is that? He said, oh, this is Esther. I'm like, what part? I've read Esther a bunch of times. This is one of my favorite books. And he's like, oh, this is verse 1, chapter 1. I'm like, you mean it starts with this? So we could just go there, right? Esther chapter 1, verse 1. And there's some sneaky stuff that happens in Esther, especially with the translations. Y'all will see it based on how I read my translation. I'm using the English Standard Version. Pull up a different version, you'll see the sneaky stuff almost immediately. So Esther chapter 1, verse 1 says, now in the days of Osiris, the Osiris who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. In those days, when King Osiris sat on his royal throne in Susa, the citadel, in the third year of his reign, he gave a feast for all of his officials and servants, the army of Persia and Media, and the nobles and governors. The provinces were before him, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days, 180 days. Let's stop right there. First, let's look at the range that it said that he ruled over. It starts off, verse 1 says that he reigned from India to Kush, or India to Ethiopia. That's a large territory. Now, the thing that I found interesting is that that entire territory encompasses all of the cultures I get in trouble for talking about. That's important for later, right? So pretty much everything between Ethiopia or Kush and India is all his territory. He's ruling it all right now. And I also find it interesting that his name is Osiris. Now, if you're looking at this verse from a separate translation, instead of Osiris, it says Xerxes. And that's the sneaky stuff I was talking about. Because Osiris is very much an Egyptian name, a Kemetic name. So let's continue, right? I'll read all the way down to verse 9. So we're at verse 5. And when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, the citadel, both the great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and violet hangings, fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rods and marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of marble, of mother of pearl, and other precious stones. Okay. Get the point. It's beautiful, right? Verse 7, drinks were served in golden vessels, vessels of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king, and drinking was according to this edict. There is no compulsion. For the king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. Meaning drink until you can't drink no more. He say we got enough for everybody. We don't run out up here. Then verse 9, it talks about his queen. Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Osiris. Vashti is very much a Hindu name. Remember, his kingdom, his empire, ranges from India to Ethiopia. That's massive. Oh my goodness. So you have a very much Kemetic king, or at least a king with a Kemetic name, and a Hindu wife, ruling over all the territory between those two regions. That's a massive territory. In fact, it's very close. It's a little bit bigger, actually, to what I talk about when it comes to talking about Smai Tawi, right? The land that we know as Egypt being in the in East Africa, right? In the ancient times, it was called Kemet. Before it was called Kemet, it was called Smai Tawi. Smai Tawi means the place where the upper and the lower meet, or the place where heaven and earth meet. And it's a territory that stretches the length of the Nile Valley, but also extends over to pretty much where the Tigris and Euphrates are, which is the whole territory where most of the Bible takes place. Well, King Osiris's temple, his empire stretched even beyond that and reached India. So that's something that's something to be considerate of. That's something to pay attention to. So what's the point of this? Remember, I said the book of Esther is a book all about sonship. It's all about the kingdom experience. It's all about the structure of the kingdom of heaven. That's what's being revealed here. And it's actually showing you your process and your ascent to the throne. So even when it gets down to verse 10, right? And I'm not going to read all of the 2 chapters. I'm telling you where I'm at. You go read it later. verse 10, it talks about the names of the 7 eunuchs. They have names from various cultures as well. You have Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Big, all these different names. These are multicultural names. That's something to take note of. Now, I've made my sessions before. I've talked about it on my channel before about how Kemet is one of the main foundations and inspirations of the Bible, and even that the figure that we know as Yeshua is the same as Osiris. I've talked about that already. I don't want to rehash that, but this is biblical proof of there being some more connection. Now, what does all of this have to do with the kingdom of heaven anyway? Well, remember, Book of Esther is all about the kingdom of heaven and our placement in it. So when we look at Esther, right? Esther is a Hebrew woman. She's not Jewish, she's Hebrew. She's specifically of the tribe of Benjamin, which means she has her own culture. She has her own religion. She has her own traditions. She has her own genetics. She has her own epigenetics. She has her own stuff. We go over to chapter 2. This is when she actually gets inducted into the kingdom. Because what pretty much happens is Queen Vashti makes King Osiris mad. He gets rid of her. Now he got to go find him another wife. So you get down to about verse 7, verse 8. It starts talking about them bringing Esther into the kingdom. This is chapter 2 of the book of Esther. Verse 8, it says, so when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in custody of Haggai, that's one of the eunuchs, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Haggai, who had charge of the women. And the young woman pleased him and won his favor, and he quickly provided her with her cosmetics and her portion of food, and with the 7 chosen young women from the king's palace. That's important. And advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. Esther had not made known to the people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known, meaning she's in a place and they don't know her origins anymore. They don't know she's a Benjamite. They don't know she's a Hebrew anymore. Her father told her, keep that quiet. You don't need that where you're going. Now, what happened is, see, those 7 maidens that they talked about there, those 7 women that were with Esther, actually began to teach and train her when she was selected. Those were her mentors. They trained her in the customs and the ways of the kingdom that she was now in. Like her father said, he's like, hey, look, when you go in here, you're not a Hebrew anymore. You're not a Benjamite anymore. Keep that under wraps. That doesn't matter where you're going. When you get into the kingdom, it doesn't matter what culture you come from. It doesn't matter about your bloodline. When you're in that kingdom, your focus is on the king and assimilating into his kingdom. Oh, that's important. So Esther submits herself to the tutorage of these 7 maidens, and these 7 maidens, they coach and they train her. They teach her the ways of the kingdom. They help coach her out of whatever residue from her former culture she was still carrying, because, just because you're not saying where you're from doesn't mean people can't tell where you're from. She's undergoing a mentorship part. So now this process of getting your culture out of you so you can embrace the ways of the kingdom should sound familiar to people that are familiar with me, because that's just the 7 spirits. That's the same function that the 7 spirits have when it comes to our sonship journey. What they do is they teach and they train us out of our customs, out of our culture, out of whatever carnal stuff we started with. And remember, carnality isn't evil. It's just not spiritual. So they coach and train us out of our carnality and into divinity so that we can fully rule and reign. so that we can assimilate to the ways of the empire of heaven. The same thing that the seven spirits do, the same thing these seven maidens are doing. That's an important key. So even for you, when you come into the kingdom, there are some things that you have to learn, and there's some things you have to put behind you. Backing away from Esther for a moment, there's an important thing that happens during Exodus. There's an important thing that happens during the book of Exodus. That's story of Moses leaving from Egypt, right? And the idea is that at this moment, at least per narrative, right? Just follow with me. Egypt is a bad place to be. It's an old place. It's a place that expired, right? They were blessed to be in Egypt. Egypt was a refuge for a period of time and ended up staying too long. How many of you can be honest and say you went to a place that was authentically a blessing and then you overstayed your welcome? You stayed there longer than you were supposed to and started to be negatively affected because your time there expired and you still stayed. So let's say that's just what happened to the Hebrews. It's not so much that Egyptians are bad. They ended up in a space where if they were on the timings of the divine, they would have never ended up in bondage. But now they're in bondage. Egypt isn't a good place. It's an expired place for them. And they're trying to get to this promised land. So in this process, they start to leave Egypt. Well, what happens is they cross through the Sea of Reeds. It's a typo. It's not supposed to be Red Sea. That for real is a typo. It's another body of water in the same region. They're crossing over there, and Pharaoh and all of his army starts to chase after them. And the water, they pass through the water. The king comes with them, and the water shuts in, drowning Pharaoh and his army. The Hebrews then continue out through the water and into the wilderness, is all they call it. In the wilderness, they follow a pillar of fire by day. A pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. This is their journey over to the promised land, a land that was promised, a land where promises come from, a land of abundance, a land of destiny. I'm painting a picture for you. It's important to show that in order for them to get to the land that was promised to them, they had to first leave the place that they were expired in. They had to leave the place that had expired. But they didn't just go from Egypt to the promised land. There was this important phase called the wilderness. And something that I found interesting is that the structure of the Exodus very much matches the ways of the temple. In that when you enter into the kingdom, into the temple in the outer court, there's a laver with water that you pass by. There's a brazen altar of fire that marks the entrance into the holy place or the inner court. At the other end of the inner court, right before you go into the Holy of Holies, there's another altar called the altar of incense. So when you look at the brazen altar and the altar of incense, you have your pillar of cloud and your pillar of fire. You even have the water that you have to pass through before you get to the fire and the vapors, the fire and the cloud, being in the water laver. This is all temple structures. Now, why is that even important? Well, what happens is in the inner court or the holy place, that's the place that was very restricted. Only the priests were allowed in that phase of the temple. It was the re-education center. It's where they learn the ways of the Spirit. Or at least they were supposed to be, right? But that's the area of re-education. Putting down the things that you picked up in the outer court or beyond the walls. Letting that be purified off of you so that you don't track where you came from into where you're supposed to be. You ever met someone, or maybe this is you, where they think that just because they moved to a different city that life is going to be different for them? But the truth is, if they don't get where they came from out of them, they'll just replicate where they were trying to escape from. Ever seen someone leave an abusive relationship only to go right back into another abusive relationship? They leave that one, go into another relationship. It's because they're leaving physically, but internally, they're still in the past. So I found it interesting that even in the story of Moses, that they found it necessary not just to leave, but to get out of them that which was a part of them, the things that they picked up over there, the ideas of bondage that were in their head. This is the reason why so many of them died in the wilderness, is because they died with the thing that was expired already. And truthfully, that's what's happening to a lot of you that's trying to keep your religions going. You are going to die with it instead of move on to the promise, moving on to the kingdom. So let's keep it going. So we have that as a basic story. Now, the seven spirits, it's the reason I'm talking about this. Within the inner court, there's a menorah. It's a candlestick. It's a lampstand with 7 candlesticks on it. The book of Revelation talks about this, talking about the position of the sun being that he stands in the middle of the 7 candlesticks, and those 7 candlesticks are the 7 spirits of God. Isaiah 11:2 actually mentions the 7 spirits of God in order: Spirit of the Lord, wisdom, understanding, counsel, might, knowledge, and the fear of the Lord. Now, fear of the Lord doesn't mean be scared of God. No, instead, it actually speaks to a sense of respect, awe, and wonder. Amazement actually fits a whole lot better. But those are the mentors. So those are connected to the inner court. That's the menorah, the thing that illuminates the temple. Well, that's what we call it when you have a revelation, is that you had a moment of illumination. Something that was unclear became clear. Something that you didn't understand, you now get. Something that was in the dark, illuminated. Right? So that's actually the function of the 7 spirits. They help to illuminate us. Well, what does illumination do? It's the presence of light that drives out darkness, which means what they're supposed to do is, right, when you enter into the inner court, when you enter into the holy place is supposed to purge out of you that which isn't holy. The holy place, right, that illuminated space is supposed to confront every area of you that's still dark. It's supposed to shine light on all the places that still need illumination, and you don't pass on to the next phase until you're clean, until there is no darkness in you. Why? Is it because they don't love you? No, it's because if you don't get the darkness out of you, if you don't get the outer court out of you, if you don't get your culture, if you don't get your pain and your suffering out of you, you'll bring your pain, your suffering, your fear, your doubts, your old culture into a new season and destroy the thing that was supposed to be a promise for you. The thing that was supposed to bless you, you'll turn it into a curse. And this is why so many of them died in the wilderness, is because they couldn't get out of them, their pain and their suffering and their culture, in order to actually receive the promise that was being given to them. Just to be honest, too many people try to bring their Christianity into the kingdom. That's like skipping the wilderness and just going straight to the promised land. Too many people try to bring their Islam with them. No, you got to leave all that stuff behind. Right? Now, here's the thing. Just as, Esther chapter 1, we're talking about a kingdom here. King Osiris's kingdom very much matches the kingdom of heaven in that it stretches over all the cultures. It has influence in all the regions and all the cultures, which means there's an embassy, an outlet that speaks to you regardless of what culture you start in, because the empire is that massive. Which means when you start to operate in the kingdom, you'll see things that are familiar in comparison to the culture you come from. But that's not a validation of the culture you come from. That actually is a testimony of how massive the empire is, that it bleeds into everything a little bit. So while there are some areas of familiarity, when you come into the kingdom, you actually have to unlearn everything. You have to start over. This is why the Bible says, when you enter into the kingdom, come in as a little child. Come in as a child, come in as a babe. Why is that? Well, have you ever been around toddlers before? Have you been around little kids before? All they do is ask questions because they don't know anything. So they're giving you a similar presentation with the kingdom. They're saying when you enter into the empire of heaven, whatever level of expertise you might have had in your respective culture, understand that it does not matter anymore because the ways are now higher. So yes, when you enter into the kingdom, not only do you have to put away, will you end up putting away a lot of your carnal life, your secular life, but even most of your religious life. That's not safe either. Because here's the thing, your religion is still carnal. It's a form of carnality. Your religion, your traditions, that's still outer court. And the outer court can't actually reach into the innermost. That's just stuff for you to do outside. It has nothing to do with the real processes. Why is religion still included within the outer court? It's because religion, regardless of which one we're talking about, whether it's Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hindu, still require your ego as a major facet of it. They still require you to be in your flesh and be out of identity. I'm a little bit more familiar when it comes to Christianity. I was Christian for 20 years, so I'm a little bit more familiar with it. So I can say this and be certain about it, that Christianity thrives better when more people are in their flesh. The more in the spirit you are, the more you clash against the system, which is why they spend so much time trying to get spiritual people to not be as spiritual so that they can still be controlled by their ego enough. You're being a little too spiritual. You know what? That makes you arrogant. You need to humble yourself. Let's not be as spiritual. Stop going pray. I've heard people have those situations. I didn't make that up. I have heard of pastors who tell their people, stop praying as much because you're hearing God more than me. I didn't make that up. I know those peoples. I know some of those pastors. So when you come into the kingdom, understand this. A kingdom presentation that still carries the whole religion that the person started off in is an abomination. That's actually a form of mixture. It's a corruption because the kingdom is fantastic on its own. Did you read the description of King Osiris's temple in Esther chapter 1? You have the gold and the silver and the cups and the abundance. Oh my goodness. It was so beautiful. Even with the descriptions given, it's hard to fathom. You don't have anything they need in the kingdom. They have everything you need. So that strike one for humility is that when you come into the kingdom, you're not coming with something to offer. You show up to receive. You start off as a clean slate. It was Catherine Kuhlman that said, God's not looking for golden vessels or silver vessels, just willing vessels. Looking for people who actually learn the ways of the Spirit, because that's where we keep getting caught at. You have a lot of people who have desires for the Spirit, but are getting stuck in religion, and then they get their commitment to their religion. They're more committed to their religion and their culture than they are to the kingdom, which means anytime the kingdom or the empire disagrees with their culture, they back off. You know, in America, like we're more Democrat than we are kingdom. We're more Republican than we are kingdom. We're more conservative than we are kingdom. We're more MAGA than we are kingdom. We're more Christian than we are kingdom. We're more churchy than we are kingdom. We're more charismatic than we are kingdom. which means anytime the kingdom does something outside of that thing I identify with more, it's demonic now. We got to speak against that. That's too much for me. Now, why does the question I have to ask is how come the same God has to keep gaining your trust? The only way you have to keep surrendering is that you've never surrendered to begin with. Pretty much the agreement most people have is, all right, God, whoever you are, I'll do whatever you say as long as you keep me comfortable. I value my culture more than you, and as long as you don't disturb my culture too much, I'll work with you insofar as you let me have my culture. Which means most of what we've experienced hasn't been kingdom. We've seen the benefits of the kingdom in our religions because we've never fully dissolved our religions in order to just be kingdom. Even people who leave religion and they're not religious no more, their framework is still religious. People who supposedly hate Christianity quote the Bible more than some of the pastors I know. I hear people who ain't religious, ain't interested in church, ain't interested in Christianity, still quote verses that suit their means. As soon as they don't want to pay for something, it's freely, it's given. I'm like, wait, you don't even like the Bible. Where you get that from? Because that's still their foundation, even if they're not in the structure. So when it comes to operating in the kingdom, your Christianity has to go, your Islam has to go, your Buddhism has to go, your Hinduism has to go, your star seed ship has to go. All of that has to go, not because all of that is wrong, not because it's not valuable. Look at Esther chapter 1. All of it was in the empire, but notice the empire had to be number one priority. Esther's stepfather or father, Mordecai, told her, look, when you go in the kingdom, don't tell them you Hebrew, don't tell them you Benjamite or nothing. None of that matters. So we have cognitive dissonance. We have people who are kingdom and Christian. I remember hearing these sermons when I was a Christian. They say you can't be Hindu and Baptist. Said you a Lutheran Muslim. I know somebody, they were raised, said mama was Jehovah's Witness, daddy was Muslim. Crazy, right? You know, some stuff don't match, you know, so cognitive dissonance. That's how funny we sound trying to be kingdom. Even for the people who don't like the word kingdom because it still reminds them of Christianity, being kingdom is just being spiritual. They're like, oh, I'm not nothing. I'm just spiritual. Well, baby, that's kingdom. The kingdom is that spirituality that most of us have been looking for. And that's been one of the greatest things that I've experienced in my ministry recently. Before I left for Kenya, Yeshua told me to do a podcast. He said, you need to be on a podcast that deals with out-of-body experiences and around people who would typically be labeled New Age. I was like, okay. Any reason why? You know, I'm going to do it. He said, oh, it's because most of them are just looking for me and are highly uninterested in Christianity. I'm like, oh, that's my people then. People who just want spirituality and aren't interested in religion, my people. Let's go. Let's do it. Let's get some work done. So the same way Esther had to put aside the fact that she was a Benjamite in order to be kingdom, be taught and trained by the 7 maidens, the same way you need to be taught by the 7 spirits in order to become royalty, equal to the rest of the royalty, equal to the king. This is our process and this is our journey, regardless of where you're starting out on. You know, I get compared to certain people, various religions, various cultures. There's people I admire. There's people that I respect from different cultures. And a lot of them share the same sentiment as me. Like there's one individual, Swami Kalishwar. A lot of the same revelations. We never met each other. A lot of the stuff that I know in private, he's written books about because we're spending time. People would call him Hindu. He's like, I'm not Hindu. I'm just Indian. You know, I've been able to find sons all over the world, various cultures, because they're connected to the same royal family, gone through the same processes, know the same seven spirits I do, know the same Yeshua I do, know the same father, mother that I do. Because their identity is in the kingdom, not in the culture they started off with. So my question for so many of you is, how long are you going to keep your culture instead of just being kingdom? How long are you going to hold on to your religion as a safety device, as a safety net, instead of just being kingdom? Instead of actually just being spirit-led? So much fear is in the way. So many people are afraid of being led astray. I want to give you the freedom of knowing you were already led astray. Regardless of whatever religion you started with, if you started in a religion, you were already led astray. It's okay. The only thing that's true is the empire itself. The only thing that's true is spirit itself. Anything that's not spirit and kingdom, it was false. That's okay. Not beating you up for that. I had to go through my own process of unlearning. I had to go through the same school, divorcing Christianity and clinging to the seven spirits so that I could see the world without the filter of my old culture in the way. So now I meet people and they mention the third eye. I don't immediately think they're witches. Church taught me that. The kingdom never taught me that. You know, I meet people from various religions and I'm not trying to size them up and see whose God is better, because I know we got the same God. We just speak a little different language. You know, it's a much different process. You know, I had to go through that myself. That's why I can be in any culture and fit right in, because I'm not a part of any of the cultures. I love the people enough to learn their cultures, but I'm not in their cultures. Any of you ever seen Avatar? The blue people, right? First one or second one. You know, the humans come over and they get them another body and they learn to assimilate into the culture of the Na'vi. Yeah, that's what kingdom life is like. That's what it's like for me. Whenever I go into church, I'm just fitting in because I understand them. I love them and I understand them. I'm not one of them, though. I fit in, but I'm not one of y'all. I'm very open about not being a Christian. But likewise, when I'm with the Hindus, I fit in with the Hindus. When I'm with the Buddhists, I fit in with them. I'm with the tribal Africans, I fit in with them. They love me. You know, I'm able to assimilate into any kingdom, into any religion, into any culture, because my kingdom is already in those cultures. I just had to find out how they already knew my God and knew my kingdom. That told me how I was to show up in their world. That's awesome. So that's where I'm at. I'm like, it's a kingdom that's too big to fit, in the same way that your Bible ends the book of John by saying Yeshua is too much to fit into books, even though Christianity still tries to fit him in 66 of them books. The kingdom's too big to fit in one religion, to fit in one culture. You think, okay, let's be for real right now. Let's come on, let's do a little bit of math. You mean to tell me your God is omnipresent and only exists in the Middle East? That the Bible doesn't start with Hebrews and the first Hebrew you know by name is Abraham, but only the Hebrews know God? Matter of fact, in the book of Hebrews, when it starts talking about the great cloud of witnesses, I believe that's chapter 11, leading into chapter 12, it talks about the great cloud of witnesses and doesn't mention one Christian. Several of them weren't even Hebrew. 2 of them were Egyptian. And you think God was only faithful to one culture? No. That's a colonized mindset, thinking that God has a favorite bloodline. Nah. Sorry. How is God omnipresent and not everywhere? At the very least, most places. Can we meet in the middle and say most places? How can Elohim be omnipresent and not be most places? Shoot, your Bible even says, y'all keep trying to make hell this place where God isn't at. And then you read the Bible, it says, behold, if you descend into hell, there you are. If I descend into hell, there you are with me. Like, this place where Elohim doesn't exist. We just gotta do the math on this sometimes. You mean to tell me that the Ancient of Days didn't start talking to humanity until Abraham? So you have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years of people living life without Abraham. And none of them encountered God at all? Nobody? I mean, that's not the story of the Bible. The Bible got a bunch of people before Abraham. You know, Noah wasn't a Hebrew. He's Mesopotamian. You know, Moses was only Hebrew by bloodline. He was Egyptian by culture. In fact, they praise him for the things that he learned in Egypt in the book of Hebrews. Egypt can't be too bad. They're praising him. They're praising Moses for his Egyptian wisdom. Egypt can't be too bad. You know, Joseph, through Ephraim and Manasseh, was able to was able to bless his bloodline and bring the covenant back into order. That's mixing cultures. Something that my friend, Apostle Daniel Wasonga, another amazing man of God. I love that guy. Something that he talks about in the series he's been doing on the Gentile cult. You notice that all throughout the Bible, all of the forefathers, for the most part, had to marry a Gentile wife, and all their blessings came through their wife's side. It's almost like the kingdom is much bigger than the culture that y'all are clinging to. When you read the Bible tells you a different story than the one you might be familiar with in Sunday school. That's all I'm saying. Critical thinking, reading, writing, you know, these things come in handy. A little bit of math. You know, you think about it. I've talked about this several times when talking about the Hebrews. The word Hebrew means they that cross over, or they that cross over the waters. It's a nomadic people. The whole history of the Hebrews and most of what you read about in the Old Testament is a nomadic people group going place to place, civilization to civilization, mixing and mingling with whoever it is that they're with for that time being, and then they move on to the next. But every time they are with the culture, they assimilate the knowledge that they're getting from there, and they keep what works for them. So truthfully, a lot of you who believe in the Hebraic and practice the Hebraic, but you're racist in that you think other cultures are instantly demonic, you've missed the heart of the Hebraic, because they didn't think those other cultures were demonic. They learned from all of them. They assimilated all of them. It's a reason why some of the tribes of Israel are named after foreign deities. It's a reason why your Hebrew months are named after foreign deities. It's because the Hebrews didn't have a problem with that. Most of the practices that we herald as Hebraic are Hindu. They're Egyptian. They're Mesopotamian. For some reason, the Bible has all these cultures, and the only one that they let you study outside of Christianity itself is the Hebraic. And truthfully, that's only because they currently think Hebrews are white people. That's a session for another day. But the Bible is very multicultural, has been whole time through. Most people who are that dogmatic haven't actually read the whole thing just to read what's going on there. Let's see. So was Yahweh the God of the Hebrews? Yes. That was specifically the name that the Hebrews knew him by. If so, who was the God of the Kemites? So the Kemites just embraced the kingdom as a whole. They embraced the full royal family. But the Egyptians knew Yahweh as Amen. That's where Moses got it from. That's why you end your prayers with Amen. That's how Moses knew Yahweh, because Moses didn't speak Hebrew. So anyone who comes to you and says that they found the original Hebrew version of anything that Moses supposedly wrote is lying to you, because Moses didn't speak Hebrew. He spoke Medu Neter. If they say they found those tablets and they're written in Hebrew, they wrote them tablets themselves. Moses didn't speak or write Hebrew. That's why he had a brother to translate for him. Aaron spoke both. Moses only spoke Medu Neter. There's a lot of things. The Ark of the Covenant, that's a Hindu structure that just so happened to be in Egypt. That's now embraced by the Hebrews. How would it transfer? Remember, King Osiris's kingdom went from Kush to India. All of that's connected. They all mixed and mingled. They shared, they traded, they learned from each other. And the Hebrews soaked it all up. So to truly be Hebraic is to be open to whatever the Spirit is breathing on in a moment, to move when the Spirit isn't moving, and to stay when the Spirit is resting. That's to be Hebraic. It's not just to know the living letters or to follow the Hebrew holidays. It's not to be dogmatic with pronouncing certain words in Hebrew or going by the Hebrew names and phrases. It's not even about the language itself. The heart of the Hebrews is flexibility to what the divine is revealing. That's how you be Hebraic. So again, we're talking sonship today. That's what sonship is all about. You stepping out is you stepping out of whatever culture you start in and entering into the government of the Spirit that has your true identity in it. And then being whatever that is. It's more about being than it is about doing. Religion is about you doing, and maybe you'll get to be later. That's powerful. So, like one of the examples, I said that the Hebrews, a lot of Hebrew culture is Hindu. Well, your forefathers, the father of many nations himself, Abraham, his wife Sarah, those are Hindu names. In the Hindu tradition, the name of Father and Mother God is Brahma and Saraswati. Just like in Mexico, because of the influence of Christianity, you have a lot of Jesuses and a lot of Marias. They were named after the gods of their forefathers. Oh my. Not just that, the tribes of Israel. So the word for war in Sanskrit is Yehuda. The tribe that we call Judah is Yehuda, the warriors. But it also boils over to Medu Neter because you have Yehudi, referencing speech and praise, music. Well, it's the other aspect of what Yehuda means is praise or music, sound, war. All of that went into the creation that, again, the Hebrews didn't have any problems paying homage. So those are just a few things to think about. Let me know if there are any individual things y'all like for me to do a session on later. Um, in the meantime, I'm gonna start to wrap up, and that'll give y'all time to type any questions out if you have them before we're done for today. So if any of you, and again, this stuff is not mandatory, right? First, I want to say if you want to connect with me or anything that I have going on, information is on my website, caveofmystery.org. If you want to keep up with my itinerary, my upcoming events, classes, and everything else, the end of this month, I will be in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, doing a conference on immortality. There's still time for you to register if you want to come to that. So, yeah, Patreon, only $10 a month for those of you who want to access all of my teachings. YouTube, Cave of Mystery on YouTube has a lot of my public stuff, but if you actually want to hear the real stuff that I actually want to talk about, that's on Patreon. I have several books out. You can find them on Amazon. So yeah, fit in where you fit in. You're looking for a community, I do have a Discord server. All the information is on my website. And for those of you who would like to donate, again, that is not mandatory by any means. I don't do this for money, but I do like to give y'all opportunities to give if y'all want to. The information is here. These are a few ways if you want to. For those of you who want to give, trade, sow, donate, all those other words. These are some of the ways available. All right. Now let's look at some of the comments. Cool. So Yahweh freed the Hebrews. Yes, in the story of Exodus, that was what was going on. Let's see. When is the Super Bible dropping? Once we finish. We are almost done with it. We got about 40 books left in the collection. The Super Bible is a project of me compiling a bunch of biblical texts all together in one volume. So for those of us who like to read and study, you don't have to carry around four or five different volumes to have all your books. So currently the count is at 175 books of the Bible, all in one volume. More information on that coming soon. Let's see, just joined. Are there queens in the empire? Tons. How do we find out more info about the seven spirits? So I've done a few sessions on YouTube on the seven spirits, but the best way to get to know them is to begin to build a relationship with them. Just as the body is the temple, they exist on in the inner court. So they're already on the inside of you. You just got to start those conversations. Also, I talked about them a lot in my book, Fullness Guide to Sunship and Mysticism. Let's see. Nelson, would you say anyone can access God and or the heavenlies? You don't have to be Christian per se. Correct. In fact, being Christian makes you wait until you die to go to heaven. 10 times out of 10. The other cultures, from what I've experienced, are a lot more interested in just accessing heaven now. And the other thing is that their description of heaven is very accurate. So it's not like this lesser thing. That's also one of those racist triggers that people like to do. Anytime a culture other than theirs has something similar, they say it's a counterfeit. Even if they've never looked at it, studied it, examined it, just because it's different, it's a counterfeit now. I had a conversation with another mystic who I've worked with in the past where she was upset at some of the stuff I teach right now. And she was saying, well, everything else is a counterfeit. I was like, well, the thing about that is the counterfeit is never the original. The counterfeit is never the older thing. You get it if you get it. Where do we access healing in the kingdom? So healing is accessed in the outer court. It's one of those things that's already been given. You just got to receive it. How often do you go live? I don't have a set live schedule. I go live whenever I have a reason to go live. Let's see. So if the other, that's a good question. So if the other gods are simply the empire shown through the lens of different culture, is there no such thing as false god or saving, as the Christians put it? Emphasis on the as the Christians put it. Right? Yeshua was a polytheist. Yes, Yeshua, the Lord and Savior himself, was polytheistic. Why would I say that? The Bible's monotheistic. There's only one God. No. The Bible says that children of Israel, your God is one. Yeah, the Israelites, yeah, they had one God, but not only one exists, but Yeshua specifically was polytheistic. He believed in multiple gods, and he believed that you were those other gods. That's why he walked around and told people, don't you know that ye are gods? That word being Elohim, Elohim means gods, and Elohim is plural. It's the same Elohim you hear in Genesis 1 when it says that Elohim created the heavens and the earth, and Elohim said, let us make man in our image. It's the same plurality. Yeshua said that's what you are. Good question. So who became the devil per religion? So the devil is always whoever the enemy is of that culture. In some cases, depending on what culture you're dealing with, Yeshua is the devil they're talking about in their culture. In some cases, Yahweh is the devil they're talking about. In some cases, it's another deity. It's another figure. It just depends on the culture. Whoever my enemy is the devil across history and cultures alike. Let's see. Where does wickedness come from or influenced by? It's a byproduct of ignorance. When you're unfamiliar with your heavenly identity, you act out of character. And that's the truth for creation itself. We're not the only thing that forgot who we were. And when you don't know what you are or who you are, you do whatever. My friend, Apostle Lance Bellany, he has a quote that I love. He says, when the purpose of a thing is unknown, the misuse of that thing is inevitable. When you don't know who you are, you're bound to mistreat yourself and mistreat others. Period. And that's one of the simplest ways I could answer that. Now, cool. All right, y'all. So I'm almost at an hour, so I think I'm gonna wrap up. Again, I don't have a set live schedule. You just got to catch me when you catch me. But I will say this: once a month, I do host a Q&A session on my Patreon. So for those of you who have questions, legit questions, sign up on Patreon. It's only $10 a month. Typically about 2 hours straight of me just answering questions, as many as y'all have within that 2 hour span. So again, for those who came late, caveofmystery.org, Cave of Mystery on YouTube. You can find everything related to me, caveofmystery.org. All my links are there. All my connection points are there. That's it for this session. I love y'all. Hopefully y'all learned something new. Hopefully you got inspired. Blessings to you all. Until next time, y'all be blessed. Later.